afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are well. I am the Civil Rights Outreach Coordinator, one of the four, and I'm in the Pittsburgh region, which is the western region of the counties, all 27 of them out of the 67. So I am in Pittsburgh. Where are you from? If you're able, please put in your name and your location, organization affiliation. We're happy that you're here with us this afternoon for this Lunch and Learn. We're excited to have Dr. Audia Robinson with us to talk about a very, very important and very critical subject, understanding wealth gap. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Audia Robinson as far as the bio here. Dr. Audia Robinson, a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is the CEO and founder of DeSylvia Investments, the company behind the holistic brand DeSylvia. What began as her love for travel, education, and wellness has grown into a mission to help others live with purpose, prosperity, and wholeness. Through DeSylvia, Dr. Robinson provides opportunities and resources that empower individuals and communities to thrive, offering financial, education, tailored travel experiences, and essentials that support everyday well-being. Her work is a reflection of her belief that true wealth extends beyond finances. With over a decade of experience in financial services, she holds a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from Penn State University and an MBA and a PhD in community engagement from Point Park University, right up the street from where I'm at, Dr. Robinson, by the way. Her doctoral research focuses on understanding the lived experiences of building and sustaining generational wealth among Black communities. Underscoring her lifelong commitment in equity and empowerment, a passionate speaker and mentor, she inspires audiences from elementary schools, classrooms to universities, helping people of all ages see financial education, worldwide destinations, and wellness as pathways to transformation. She challenges us to not only dream of a better future, but to create it. Grounded in wellness, guided by wisdom, and enriched by experience, Dr. Audia Robinson continues to turn passion into impact through DeSylvia. So can we please give Dr. Robinson a warm PHRC Lunch and Learn welcome this afternoon? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anita and Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session on understanding the wealth gap. I am Dr. Audia Robinson, and I'm so excited to be here today with you all to have a conversation. At least I want this to be a conversation around the importance of not only understanding what the wealth gap is, but identifying policies that influence the wealth gap, as well as a call to action. So towards the end, I want you to think about, how can we bridge the gap? So as we get started, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll leave a couple minutes towards the end to go over your questions or open up for comments. And as we go through, I am going to ask you some questions, so I hope you're ready. I'm not going to ask you what was your favorite dream destination or your favorite hobby. I'm going to ask you some questions related to the wealth gap. So let's get started. I'm curious to hear from you in the chat. When you hear the word wealth, what is the first image or feeling that comes to mind? Again, feel free to just drop your, okay, I see someone put the money sign. Money, right. Mansions, security, generations, I love that. Yes. Stability, home ownership, freedom. Yes. Not living check to check. Okay. Assets. Right. Exactly. Oh, I love that. Generational freedom. I saw someone put exclusion. So, when we talk about wealth, before we even talk about the wealth gap, it's important to understand the distinction between income and wealth. So income, as someone stated, it's what you earn, right? It's what you earn. So you go up, you show up to your job, you provide a service, or a product. In exchange for your time, you receive income. And usually that income is disposed of almost immediately sometimes. I saw someone mention in the chat, not living check to check when it comes to wealth. Sometimes with income, some individuals are living check to check, right? So it's more short term as opposed to long term. Now, when it comes to wealth is looking at what you own minus what you owe. So looking at your net worth, that's how wealth is measured. Now, wealth on the other end more so focuses on long-term stability. So maybe you're a homeowner, or maybe you have investments, or maybe you're maybe you're a business owner, right? So it's important to understand the two in order to understand what the wealth gap is. So in a brief definition, the wealth gap refers to the vast difference in net worth and opportunities between groups. Now, often we hear the wealth gap referred to as the racial wealth gap, right? But I want to be clear that there are other areas where the wealth gap can lie. So it can fall in gender, with class, which is a major one, even with educational levels. And that's important to identify. Now, going back to the income, who truly owns the wealth in America, right? Raise your hand if you're in the top 1%. No, don't do that. I'm just kidding. But I'm curious I want to show you this slide because there are 4 major areas where Americans own wealth. Now, you may hear the term top 1%. So this area is the ultra wealthy, right? Those who have control over 30%, it's roughly 31% of all of the US wealth. So these are your multimillionaires, your billionaires, those who own major businesses, right? A few thousand families own as much as millions of others combined. Imagine that, right? Mm-hmm. The next subject or the next area is the 9%. So those in the upper middle class, or you may hear it referred to as the 90th or 99th percentile. So those individuals, households usually hold roughly 2/3 of the nation's total wealth when combined with the top 1%. And then we get into the working class. Those are individuals who usually live comfortably, yet often struggle with long-term wealth, right? So these individuals usually don't always have, they may have limited liquid savings. They may have a 401k. They may have home value, but they may struggle with pulling liquid savings from their savings fund. Now, when we get to the other group, this group tends to struggle with building wealth, right? So this is a significant portion of the US. However, only roughly 2.5% of the nation's total wealth fall within this group, right? So individuals that fall within this group may have some type of assets, often living paycheck to paycheck. However, they may be renters, low-wage workers, and often burdened by debt. Now, I want to hone back in on the top 1% and just I want you to understand the 30% when it comes to the total wealth, right? So what does this reveal? This reveals that there is obviously a significant wealth gap, right? So only 1% of the US owns roughly 31% of the total US wealth. So this lets us know that there are some structural issues, right? There's a group of individuals who have, more access to certain assets and maybe control over certain decision making, whether it's policy or on a more community or a more individual level. And we'll dive into that later. Why does wealth even matter? I'm curious to hear from you. Just if anyone, feel free to drop in the chat, why do you think wealth matters? Now, there are some points here that I highlighted. One is financial security, right? So when it comes to wealth, it's important to have some type of cushion, okay? So maybe there's a job loss, maybe there's an economic downturn, or maybe you have a new business adventure. Wealth matters because it helps to provide that cushion. Another is freedom and choices, right? So when it comes to more wealth, that sometimes means more control over your time, your career paths, as well as retirement and lifestyle decisions, right? I saw someone mention, for more opportunities, which brings us to the next, need savings account. So, which brings us to the next point is opportunity building. So wealth enables investment in education, business, and assets that grow over time, creating, as I mentioned before, long-term stability. It also gives us the opportunity to create generational impact. So building wealth allows you to leave a legacy supporting not only your family members, but to do philanthropy work, as well as to support the generations ahead of us. And it also allows us to influence, right? Influence how we shape our communities, as well as funding new ideas and contributing to socioeconomic development, So if wealth matters, why don't we all have it? I mean, we see the numbers, right? I just showed you the top 1%, the next 9%. Why don't we all have it? Anyone, feel free to drop your answers in the chat. Why don't you think we all have it if wealth is this significant? So, if wealth matters, why don't we all have it? Okay. So, one is, right, less opportunity, scarcity, right. So, unequal starting points. Someone put greed. Yes, I could. Systemic barriers, right. So, a major one here is unequal starting points. So, not everyone begins with the same access to education, resources, or networks. One thing to note here is equal opportunity does not always mean equal access. And for those of you who attended the wealth gap simulation in person, I believe it was over the summer, you might recall seeing the slide where speaking about the difference between equity and equality. Equity holds just a tad bit more weight than equality. And the reason being is because it's important to meet people where they're at. Now, I'll give you an example. Some of you may have seen a picture. If you participated in that wealth gap simulation, you should recall this. Let's say if I gave everyone the same size bike, right? You have some people who are shorter, some people are taller, maybe some people need a three-wheel bike, whatever that may be. But imagine if I focused on just equality and I gave that same size bike to everyone, right? It may not work for everyone because we're not meeting people where they're at. Now, when it comes to equity, if I provide a smaller bike, maybe for the person who is on the shorter side, or maybe if I provide a taller bike for the person who's on the taller side, I'm meeting that person where they're at. So that's a simple example to explain the difference between equity and equality. So another reason why wealth matters is the importance or why we don't all have wealth is because the financial education gap. Many of us were never taught how to build, manage, or invest wealth effectively. So if we're not attending educational lunch and learns such as this one, or attending workshops, that can be detrimental to the trajectory of building wealth, right? Someone put credit card payments, right? Maybe you're late on a credit card payment. So another reason why we don't all have wealth is income versus wealth. Earning money isn't the same as growing it. You can earn a lot of money, but if you're not strategizing in ways to build that wealth, or you're lacking savings, you're lacking assets, this is going to keep us vulnerable. And that's where you go from income to wealth, wealth to generational wealth. When I do presentations around building and sustaining generational wealth, one area I mention here is starting with the mindset, shifting from a fixed mindset to a mindset of abundance. It's important to adopt a growth mindset. From that point, taking your passion, changing that into income, income into wealth, wealth into generational wealth. And often individuals use income and wealth interchangeably. While they're very close, they're not quite the same. So it's important to understand the difference. And it is often why some people don't have wealth. Someone mentioned in the chat is systemic barriers, right? So discriminatory policies and practices have limited wealth building opportunities for many groups. And we'll get into that later. We'll go over a couple different policies. And another is economic factors, right? So rising cost of living and when it comes to saving and investing, it makes it more challenging. Wealth accumulation depends on education, policy, and history. So to understand today's gap, it's important that we look at where the divide began. So let's explore the factors that shaped our current wealth landscape. Now, there are a plethora of many different policies that took place historically that shaped today's wealth gap. I don't have them all listed here. And again, those of you who attended the wealth gap simulation, you know that there are a lot more, right? So, but today, for the sake of time, I'm only going to go over a few of them with you. And as I go over these policies, I want you to think about if you feel the wealth gap still exists today, because believe it or not, there are people who feel that the wealth gap does not exist. And there's some that do. So I want to challenge you to think about why and what we can do to change that. Now, in the middle to late 1800s, you have the Homestead Act, where, it was designed to provide acres of land for free, but it was mostly to white settlers. So it excluded most Black individuals, Black Americans and Native Americans, denying early wealth building through land. You also shift into the 1800s, where the end, quote unquote, end of slavery was formed around that time. However, you still had laws in place that restricted property ownership, business rights, and employment. So wealth building efforts of the newly freed slaves were systemically blocked during that time. And then you shift later into the beginning of the early 1900s, the separate but equal. Were schools vastly underfunded Black students, denying them of access to quality of education, limiting mobility and skilled employment, the Jim Crow laws, educational segregation. And then you shift later and you look at the redlining and the housing exclusion. We're going to talk a little more about the Homeowners Loan Corporation, but I want to mention here that the Homeowners Loan Corporation actually created the redlining maps that denied home loans to minority neighborhoods, which blocked access to generational wealth through home ownership. Black families were locked out of one of the biggest asset booms in the US history, which is home ownership. Even today, home ownership is seen to be the number one drivers to building wealth. Imagine your loved ones, your ancestors, or even today, you being the impact, the result of that, as far as your loved ones being blocked from these opportunities when it comes to building generational wealth. You also had the Social Security Act and other housing programs that lifted many out of poverty, but excluded farm and domestic workers, disproportionately affecting Black and Latino Americans. Another major one is the 1944 GI Bill, or you may hear it referred to as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, which offered free education, housing, and loans to veterans, but discriminatory practices limited benefits like home loans and college admissions for Black and minority veterans. Here are additional, policies and practices such as predatory lending that took place that rooted the wealth gap. Now, one area I want to focus on, I don't know if everyone on the call is from the Pittsburgh area, but I know a lot of you probably are, and you may be familiar with this map. So it's a formerly redline map of neighborhoods, right? Where at least 50% or more Blacks or African Americans reside. So what you're looking at here, if you see where the red areas are and shaded in it's like a black line shaded area, those were predominantly Black neighborhoods. So when it came to redlining, these areas were deemed as high risk. So what that meant was financial institutions did not want to lend to these areas, right? So they marked them high risk for investments, which led to decades of disinvestment and limited access to mortgages and home ownership in these areas. Now, if you're from the Pittsburgh area, if you look in the middle of the map, you'll see, I don't know if you can see me pointing on the screen. So if you look in the middle map here, where the triangle is, you'll see to the right of that is the Hill District. Some of you might be from the Hill District, or I'm sure you're familiar with it if you live locally. If you look upwards, you'll see areas in the north side, right? So these are all areas that are predominantly Black. And a lot of these families faced hardship when it came to obtaining mortgages. Now, I'm going to dive into a few different policies that influence the wealth gap today. Now, they're historical policies, but it's important to understand our history to understand what's going on with the aftermath today. And again, some of you who attended the wealth gap simulation, some of you may be familiar with this. And like I mentioned again, I just have a few listed here, for the sake of time. But as I read through a few policies here, I want you to really digest the magnitude of the impact today. Now, the first policy I'm going to mention here is the National Housing Act of 1934, Part 1. So policies under this law guaranteed federally backed loans to whites and legally refused loans to Blacks and anyone else who chose to live in or near Black neighborhoods. This practice, known as redlining, targeted entire Black neighborhoods and identified them as Grade D. So if we go back, Grade D is what? In the red, right? We see the Grade D area, which are what? Predominantly Black neighborhoods. This made it nearly impossible for appraisers in the private sector to do business in Black neighborhoods because all the residents were considered bad credit risks. So part 2 of the National Housing Act of 1934. Since this legislation prevented Blacks from receiving federally backed home mortgages, whites usually purchased homes in Black neighborhoods and then sold housing contracts to Blacks who wanted to become homeowners, often for 2 or 3 times the amount of mortgage. These contracts only guaranteed Black families the right to the house after all payments were complete. And imagine this, missing even one payment, just one payment, or being late would result in the Black family losing their homes immediately. This was in 1934. But imagine your ancestors, your loved ones, trying to build wealth, right? And if they missed just one payment or was late, that would result in them losing their house immediately. Another major policy impacting the housing industry were subprime loans, right? So starting in the in the 1970s and continuing to today, the private sector issued subprime loans with higher interest rates to Black families almost exclusively, regardless of your family's income, education, or even having a good credit history. Regardless, Black families were excluded from this, right? Or offered these high interest rates. As a result, Blacks continued to unfairly pay more for homes of the same value as their white counterparts. This increases foreclosures rates among Blacks, which also contributes to higher food insecurities or insecurity levels. So I just want to pause for a minute and to hear from you. So with the information that you've learned thus far, as far as policies that contribute to the wealth gap, what the wealth gap is, and why wealth is even important, do you believe the wealth gap still exists today? If so, why? And if you don't believe the wealth gap exists, I'd like to hear from you as well. Drop in the chat or feel free to, we may be able to come off mute. I want to hear from you.
Absolutely. If you want to come off mute, feel free to raise your hand and we can call you. If you want to put in the chat, you can do that as well.
Do you believe the wealth gap still exists? Okay, someone raised their hand.
Yes, we have Anthony White. Let's see. You can get off mute, Anthony, if you like.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
we can hear you.
So, all the things that you've mentioned historically have played a factor in this. And one thing I noted in the chat there, I think because I lived through it, was in the early '80s when Reagan first took office after Carter. There was a concerted effort at that point to slash federal loan grants, educational loan grants. And I think we're living through that today. Um, the what is it, $2 trillion student loan debt is a product of that decision back in the 80s. And I think that's affected our society in smaller ways, especially when it comes to access to education. The way I was raised, education was always considered the equalizer. So putting this additional barrier on that, it affects our economy as a whole. It affects home ownership. It affects credit. It affects all of those micro factors that weigh into the accumulation of wealth over time. And someone else had mentioned too in the chat, the cutting of the corporate tax rate. That too has had an effect. So as far as whether or not the wealth gap exists, in my opinion, I think it's a no-brainer. Yes, it has. And you know, the reasons for that are manyfold now. Our economy is going through another shock under this new administration. So these are all factors, and you know, the wealth gap will continue to exist as long as we continue to allow it to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I apologize. What was your name?
Anthony.
Anthony. Thank you, Anthony.
Yes.
Anthony. Yes, absolutely. And you raise a good point as far as the wealth gap continuing to exist, right? Believe it or not, I have heard some individuals believe that there isn't a wealth gap, but the statistics are here, right? That's why we have these conversations, to show that it in fact does exist, right? And to your point, it more likely will continue to exist for generations to come. But yes, thank you for that comment. Anyone else want to share your thoughts around this?
Sure, we have some comments in the chat here, Dr. Robinson. I'm going to read those. Rick mentions, in my opinion, it does, as far as the wealth gap existing. Those that have to fight to keep it, and those that do not have, share what they can. Others are agreeing here. I don't want to assume that everyone agrees, you know. And
Right.
then Emily here, I believe the wealth gap exists because I'm a poor person with bad credit who has also been subject to predatory interest rates. Thanks for sharing that, Emily. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Let's just read more. Yes, it takes generations to create and thus undo. It still exists. Others historically, policies continue to influence. It needs to be illegal to offer predatory interest rates. Actually, there are places who have do that. Yeah. And in a number of countries, college education is free, healthcare is free. And the last comment here, Dr. Robinson, I think that a lack of education can definitely affect future earnings and therefore buying power and economic growth within a family.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for those comments and for sharing. It's always interesting when we do the wealth gap simulation in person and how emotional it can get at times. And I just want to encourage those on the call, this is a safe space, or at least I would like it to be. And feel free to open up, and just get comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations. So, thank you for sharing your input. Now, I agree with Anthony and others on the call that the wealth gap does still, in fact, exist, right? For many reasons. So if anyone comes to you and shares that the wealth gap does not exist, feel free to take a screenshot of this slide and speak to it, right? So some of you already spoke to it as far as the intergenerational barriers, lack of the student loan debt, housing costs, and, you know, even with historical inequities compounding over time, as we just mentioned, we went back to the late 1800s. We are now in 2025, and we are still experiencing issues when it comes to the wealth gap. A lot of us are, you know, we didn't start at the same point. And it's important to acknowledge. Another is unequal access to wealth building tools. So whether that's credit, capital, and home loans, you know, it remains harder to obtain in minority communities for a number of reasons. You know, sometimes someone touched on it as far as the lack of education. Sometimes it's just having the network and the resources to go to in order to know where to even begin, right? So one thing that you know, that I'm sure a lot of you have heard is the importance of your network is your net worth. And unfortunately, some of us may not have that network to fall back on, whether that's a mentor or someone who's experienced in the financial industry, whatever that may be. It's important to have that within your circle or financial advisor, whoever it is, in order to step into the realm of wealth, right? And some of us, we grew up in a way where, you know, we may have a survival mindset. You're not thinking about life insurance policies. You're not thinking about, you know, what an investment is going to look like in the next, what's your return on an investment in the next 5, 10, 20 years. You're looking at what's on the dinner table tonight, you know, and understandably so, but it's important that we take the necessary steps to move from a fixed mindset to the mindset of abundance, so we can move away from certain dysfunctional habits. Someone had mentioned before, sometimes we have to unlearn the dysfunction. And even if we don't know what wealth is yet, or we're not too familiar with it, sometimes we just need to take this first step of unlearning the dysfunction, starting from there, right? We spoke about the difference between income versus wealth. So that gets into the education. Well, there's still, the gap still exists. One is through education and employment disparities, you know, underfunded schools plus limited access to higher paying careers, even policy gaps, as we just went over, right? Uneven recovery when it comes to even the pandemic. You know, some people are still feeling the aftermath from that. Now, what can we do to break this cycle? One is from a personal level, right? So taking the necessary actions to even understand how you can get to a point of wealth, or if you do have wealth, how you can sustain that wealth and pass it on when we get into the generational wealth, right? So earlier I mentioned the formula I like to follow is turning your passion into income, income into wealth, wealth into generational wealth, with having a mindset of abundance as the basis, right? So another is at the community level, supporting local minority-owned businesses, or just supporting those in the community who you know may need the help, right? Maybe you see a strategy that you can offer to them, or just having that two-way relationship when it comes to reciprocity, you know. And a major one is policy change, right? A lot of us on this call probably have the power to influence certain policies. So going back to understand historically where certain policies have influenced the wealth gap today, and identifying those gaps within the policy, and pushing for new policies, or change of the current policies that can, reverse that, right? So you don't have to answer this question now unless you want to, but I'm curious to hear from you. What is one action you or your community could take to close the wealth gap, right? So if you're not comfortable answering at the time, no problem. But I'm curious, I just want to encourage you to think about this, right? Because if we show up and attend these lunch and learns, webinars, simulations, if we leave the room and we walk away with not taking any action, what good is it, right? Yes, we may have learned something new. Maybe something I said today already resonated with what you already know, but there needs to be action behind it, right? Whether that's at the individual level, whether it's at the community level, whether it's at making policy changes. Whatever that is, I want to encourage you to think about this question and what actions you'll take. Here are some examples of certain actions that you can take, whether it comes to taxation. Someone had mentioned that earlier. Of course, when it comes to housing, providing more affordable housing for individuals. Some of you may be in the real estate. Okay, I see some chats coming in. Let's see. So supporting my local shops and restaurants. Yes. What's the name of your restaurant? Drop it in the chat. Financial health workshops and educational seminars is one step. Absolutely, Anthony. Yes. Voting for elected officials who will support programs and policies to close the gap. Absolutely. Yes, I love that one too, Brittany. Yes. Okay. Oh, Red Line Cafe is your shop. Okay, go and support her. Another is educate. Yes, educate. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think the name is Peterson. So education is so critical when it comes to this, right? I'm a strong advocate for supporting financial education. It's what I mostly do, right? And it's important to have those conversations, even at home at the dinner table. Don't wait until you already went to school, you have a student loan debt, or don't wait until you bought the home that you maybe can't manage it. Start early. Start now. Start invest. If you have kids, start investing in your children, right? Start having the conversations now. Begin with a simple conversation around budgeting, saving, spending, debt credit management. Start now, today. You don't have to wait until the damage is already done. If the damage is there, that's fine. We can take a detour, but start today, right? Financial health workshops, yes. So I am going to wrap up with questions, but before I wrap up, I want to encourage those who do plan out to take an action. And I want to encourage you, you don't have to unmute your phone, but I want to encourage you to repeat this generational wealth pledge after me. This is a pledge where, I encourage individuals to have these conversations beyond the room. In this space, it's a virtual space, right? But the point of this is to encourage you to have this conversation with your loved ones, to have these conversations with your spouses, your peers, your coworkers, your friends, whoever that is. Go out and have these conversations. Be aware of it. So I'm going to read it off. And as you're finishing up your lunch, feel free to repeat after me. I pledge to educate myself and future generations on the importance of building and sustaining generational wealth. I will prioritize saving, investing, and building assets to secure a better financial future for myself and my loved ones. I commit to breaking the cycle of poverty and creating a legacy of prosperity for generations to come. I hope that you take heed to what was talked about today in understanding the wealth gap, and in not only understanding the wealth gap, but also being more aware, cognizant of the importance of financial education. So, which is a critical way to bridge that gap. So I would like to open up for conversation, comments, questions. We have about 10 minutes left, or maybe a little less. This is my contact information if you would like to keep in touch. I would love to hear from you. And as I mentioned before, I'm very, very passionate when it comes to financial education. And I didn't really talk too much about my study, which focuses on understanding the lived experiences of building and sustaining generational wealth among Black communities. And, my study was actually focused on the Allegheny County area, but it speaks to many of us, right? It's a twofold study where it first looks at the lived experiences, and the second half focuses on offering key strategies and best practices. So if you ever want to connect and learn more about my study, I would be happy to do so. But thank you for today's presentation, and welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. We'll open the floor up to any further questions that anyone would have in the chat or raising your hand. Thank you for the hand claps here.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize if I missed some of your comments. Okay, let's see the inventory.
Yeah, there were some comments here.
Good, fine. Okay, recommendation on where a person can get good financial education. Well, yes, there are numerous programs out there who offer credible education. If you contact me, I can share a list with you of different educational programs. I don't know where you're located. I'm assuming you're in the Pittsburgh area. If you are, I would be happy to share information with you, as well as, so my business focuses on, a piece of it focuses on financial education as well. So offering, whether it's just about personal finances or connecting you to the right person, feel free to reach out. I would love to connect with you. So great, Brett. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think there are some questions in the chat that we might have overlooked. There's one comment, different for parents than it is now as far as income building. I think we all can probably agree with that. Getting out of survival mode, and I think you spoke a lot about that as far as the restriction into expansion, as far as that.
Yes.
Comes to
Yes,
that.
and that's a major one. It's it can be a sensitive one for some folks, but guess what? It's
Sure.
okay, right? It's important to acknowledge your financial positionality, right? So the group that I showed earlier with the top 1%, the next, the 9%, regardless of where you fall on that scale, wherever your financial positionality is, it's important to have a mindset of abundance, right? Even if you are in the 50%, so the group that struggles often to build wealth, you too can build wealth, okay? It's just all in your strategy and how you do that. It can be done. So, but it starts with acknowledging and changing your mindset. It's shifting your mindset and taking action, right? So I would love to speak with anyone who, okay, so thank you, Dr. In our current environment. Okay, so Brittany says, in our current environment, there is a lot of resistance to talking about structural inequality and advancing policies that increase equity. Do you have any strategies for having meaningful conversations with folks that attribute to the wealth gap solely to personal responsibility? So that's an interesting question, Brittany, and thank you for that. So, you know, I'll put it this way. It's all about knowing your audience, right? So your approach in the crowd who you're talking to, because I get it. Some people, they may feel as though, well, you know, it's not my responsibility. I worked hard for where I am today. And, you know, why do I need to lower my level of wealth to help other communities, right? So I think it's important to understand or have a conversation around harmony when it comes to finances and harmony in our economics, right? Or economy rather. So, you know, it's a cycle. You need people to work together, and it's important to hone in, as I mentioned earlier, on the idea of reciprocity. So in my study, I talk about the social capital theory, which looks at your network, it looks at trust, and it looks at reciprocity. So it's important to understand, well, you know, it can be a two-way street, you know, so taking that approach and understanding that it's not that certain policies are to take away from people, so to speak, but it's more so to create harmony within our communities and within our economy. So, you know, I would be cautious in knowing your audience, knowing who you're talking to, and mapping a strategy from that point. Thank you for that question. Holiday, do you usually take up speaking engagement activities outside of the USA as well? Yes, I do. So I work with, so my goal is to speak with individuals, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. So I have had the opportunity to speak on different platforms where folks are from many different countries, even within the diaspora. So, you know, looking at Africa. So I'm really big on that. I feel like depending on where you're at, you know, everyone has different experiences. But it's important to understand different cultures and traditions and you know where we can help each other. So yes, I do speaking engagements, not just here. Okay, so we got a few more minutes left. So if you're going to dialogue with them about it, be willing. Oh, okay, I think that's a comment there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the saying, Anthony White. Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for a very important, powerful topic that we all can benefit from. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. We do appreciate you being here today. And please make sure, pull out your phones and scan the contact information for Dr. Robinson. This topic is a topic that I think we can have a whole conference about. When we talk about the wealth gap and the legislations that have impacted the wealth gap in a lot of different domains and intersectionalities of that, it seems like. So thank you so much for just tiptoeing on it, because I know you could have went a little bit further into this topic, a lot further into this topic. So thank you for being with us this afternoon. We appreciate you. And thank you for everyone for the engagement and the discussion. I want to make you all aware, and we'll send this out for the email that'll come out to everyone. December 2nd, we're going to have our Coalition of Natives and Allies. We're going to have our Native community speaking with us, our Indigenous community speaking with us in the month of December the 2nd, which I think is a Tuesday. And so we would love for you all to be here for that with that. The title of that will be What They Did Not Teach Us in School. So I want us to be ready for that. That's going to be a very interesting, impactful conversation to have with that community. And so I'm so glad they're going to be with us. And so we hope that you will join us that in December. That will be Tuesday, December the 2nd, and you'll get further information about that as well. Dr. Robinson, is there anything further you'd like to talk about to wrap us up with?
I know. I just want to thank you and your team and everyone who joined today's call and participated in the discussion. I appreciate all of you. And again, if you want to connect, here's my information. I would love to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Thank you all. We'll have a great afternoon. And thank you, Director Brothman. Director Brothman's put in the link for next month's Lunch and Learn with the coalitions of Natives and Allies. So please register, and we hope to see you all next month.